Hello and welcome back to the Visionaire Studio tutorials. This is part 4. Now this tutorial, I'm not going to lie to you, is very long. It actually covers one of the most complex things to do within Visionaire Studio, which is to set up your interfaces. Now that includes things like a verb coin, the cursors that interact with everything on screen, fonts that appear for the characters, but it also means we have to set up, not test them, we have to set up some walkable areas and some objects in the room and things like that in order to make sure that these interfaces are working. But eventually, at the end of this tutorial, we'll get to launch the game for the first time and see all of the work that we've done from the other tutorials, including the artwork for the rooms and the artwork for the character animations and things like that. We're actually going to get to see them for the first time working and being able to walk about a room. So bear with us on this one. It is a very long and complex process, but this is how long it takes, and it's well worth it in the end. So we will continue. As you can see here, I'm back in Flash here. Been putting together some bits and pieces for the interface. It's going to be kind of a Monkey Island 3 style verb coin, where you've got to kind of use and pick up, you've got to speak, and you've got to look. I found when I've been making my own games, certainly with Something Foul Afoot, these 3 items give you plenty of scope for doing interesting stuff within the game, but it's also reasonably doable from a time scale point of view. If you have lots of other things like pick up and use and talk to and push and pull and all those, you've got to set up actions for all those different things, and it can end up making a lot of work for you, whereas I find these 3 things perfectly good. If it was good enough for LucasArts, it's good enough for me. So I'm going to go on to talk about how to set this up in Visionaire, because it isn't easy. It's something which I've just been practicing again, looking at my old files, and I'm still not entirely sure, so you're going to have to bear with me as well. So I'm going to go through them. Hopefully it'll be relatively straightforward. First step is then create all your artwork. In this case I've got the kind of verb coin thing separate here, and then I've got the actual highlighted versions of each of these when the mouse moves over them. You're also going to need a standard cursor graphic, one that's exactly the same but maybe a different colour or something like that, which is the active cursor, and in this case I've made just one for when you're over a door to let you know you can move to a different room. And they're the basics that you need, really. You can do much more complicated than this if you like to. Visionaire does support animated cursors, so when you mouse over something the cursor could throb or glow. This could be moving through the door. There's lots of things you can do, but I'll show you the basics and then you can kind of fiddle yourself and work something else out that suits your requirements. So I've already exported these assets as PNGs in the usual way. So I'm going to move over to Visionaire and we'll have a look at that. So if you remember last time, in the previous tutorial, if you haven't been following these, it's worth going back and having a look, hopefully. We've set up our character, we've got his standing sides, his walking sides and everything. He's all aligned, ready to use. We've even got some talking ones as well. But if you try and run the Visionaire game by hitting F9, you'll say that initialization failed. That's because it can't create a game file until you've got an interface and cursors and fonts and a few other things set up. So we're going to start with the interface anyway in this tutorial. So what is an interface? You come over to this particular button here, and you'll see there are no interfaces at the moment. An interface is anything that you use to, I suppose, interface with the game. So it's the cursors that are going to actually click on things. You'll set them up in this cursors section. But interfaces can be things like the inventory panel, something like a verb coin that pops up, something like just the controls for your mouse for left clicking and right clicking and things like that. So the one that I'm going to set up, I followed a tutorial about 6 months ago when I was first making my game. I think I might have even downloaded a template of a verb coin one and learnt a little bit from that, but I'll take you through the steps that you need to do to start one from scratch. It's probably best when setting up an interface to actually set up your cursors first, because some of the interface elements that we're going to set up here reference the cursors. So let's start with cursors. Again, it's something you need in order to be able to play the game. So we're going to create a set of cursors here. Based on the graphics that I had there, just two dead simple ones. The arrow cursor, so I'm going to create one and call it arrow, and we're going to create one for doors as well. So door cursor. Okay, so the arrow itself, first thing we're going to do is we're going to, same way you would with one of the animations, you actually load in the imagery for it. With animations we've been using a frame sequence, and you can do that with the cursors, so you can make them animated, as I said. In this case I'm just going to do a single frame. It brings up the load graphic box. You can put sound files and things like that in there as well, and actions, but for the time being we're just going to go and grab an asset, and I've kind of still got everything organised nicely in assets. I've made a folder called UI for user interface, and in here I've got all the bits and pieces I've exported from Flash. You see I've got some fonts there, we'll talk about them later as well. So this is just going to be the active cursor. Sorry, I didn't mention that actually. Here at the top you've got two tabs, active and inactive. The active one's first, which is a bit strange. I would have expected it to be the other way, but there you go. So we're going to select the cursor active. I'm going to open that, click OK, and you'll see it actually loads in there. Same thing applies with this, same we did with the animation. You can actually set the center of this thing, and you should probably do that so that it's actually aligned to the tip of the cursor. So I'll just click that down on that. And the inactive cursor, exactly the same thing. We're going to add a frame there. We're going to select the file that we want, which is this normal cursor. Okay, and again, if you've exported your graphics lined up correctly, it should just be a matter of clicking these, getting them lined up. Bear with us, there we go. And you should have your active and your inactive cursor, so it'll kind of glow orange. Again, I'm going for that kind of Visionaire colours when you mouse over something. So that's the arrow cursor done, dead simple. Next thing we're going to move on to is the door cursor. So with the door cursor, you could set an active and an inactive, but I've actually just set it as the same thing in the games that I've been doing. There's so many options, I can't really show you absolutely everything, but in this case I'm just going to set the same thing for both of them. So I'm going to go and select for cursor door. Okay, and just position that correctly. And again another cursor door. What this does is in the engine you can tell the cursor to change when an action happens, and in this case whenever we set a door area to walk in or out, we'll be able to change to this cursor, and that'll kind of be an automatic thing in the user's mind. When they kind of mouse over a door, they'll be able to see that they can go out that when this cursor appears. Okay, so we've got the two basic cursors set up. That's going to help us when we come to do the interface. So let's go to the interfaces panel. So from here we are going to add our first interface item. There's going to be a few things that I'll eventually add in this game, things like an inventory that the character can keep all his items in, and maybe even a button on the interface to open up that inventory and things like that. So there are other things you can add, but first and foremost we need to create this verb coin. So I'm going to create a new interface and I'm going to call it verb coin. And once we've got this interface, we've got here these different properties of the interface, some conditions and values you can set. I don't think we'll need to go into that for this one. The first thing that we want to do is we want to set up some buttons and load in some graphics for it. So it's kind of similar to a room. If you remember, if I go back to the room view, when you've selected a room, you've got the properties of that room where you can load in a background image, and then you've got kind of objects that you add to this room. It's kind of the same with interfaces. You have the actual interface, there's things you can add here, and there's the properties and the background image and things like that there. So for this verb coin, the background image is the one that I exported, which is this full coin UI. and it's a couple of things that we need to set here actually. I think most of them might already be set, but we've got the class is the main interface. This is the main interface of the game that we're going to be using. There's options here, it's an inventory or secondary interface, and they're the kind of things I talked about earlier on, but we'll come and set those up later. But this is the main interface for our game. This is actually something that I want to appear at the position of my cursor when I click and hold. So I'm going to set it up kind of like Monkey Island 3 was, where you just hold down your left mouse button just for a fraction of a second and the interface pops up underneath your mouse cursor. So I'm actually going to put that at the current cursor position. I'll probably have to offset that later. We'll try that out. We'll see whereabouts it appears. I want it to kind of appear in the middle, so when you hold down your mouse button it appears right there in the middle of your mouse button, so none of these are going to be selected, and then all you have to do is move your mouse a tiny bit to access them. So it's nice and user friendly as well. Nice way of setting these things up. I don't know what that offset's going to be, but we'll work that out later on. And the other thing we're going to need to set here, we're going to need to set an action when the cursor leaves this verb coin, because we're going to want it to close down that interface again, because you obviously don't want the coin leaving on screen once you've clicked something. So we need to set up our first action here. If you haven't done one before, wherever you've got the opportunity to select an action, you have this little lightning bolt, and if you click that it'll bring you up an action panel. And there's a couple of things that we want to do. The first thing that we want to do is, if you already had an object picked up, because we're going to be able to pick up objects and have them kind of as your mouse cursor, the first thing we want to do is clear any object that you might already have as your cursor. So when you're creating an action, sorry I should take that a little bit slower, these entries for actions, when you click the plus, I've got mine set up to create a big table. You can sometimes have a drop down box and things like that. I think you can set them up in tools up here, but I go for this because your most frequently ones get kept there. And the thing that we're looking for is to clear, you can do a search at the bottom, a saved object. So I'll just double click that and it puts that first action in. And all that's going to do is, in case the user already has something in their hand, when they hold down the button to bring up this interface, it'll get that thing out of their hand so you don't get a problem. So these next couple of actions I'm going to put here, I'm going to be absolutely honest, this is the way that it was set up in the template that I got, and it seems to work well, so I'm just going to copy the same thing and recommend that you do too. If anyone's got any better suggestions for this, then feel free to leave some comments about that. But what this template did when I got it, where we would actually set the visibility, oh, there isn't one there, so it's an interface action that we're looking for, and it's set the interface visibility of our main interface, which is the thing that you'll currently be using. You're about to close this, to 0. Now there is, in these actions that I had originally from this template, then a pause for 500 milliseconds, and then a complete hide of the interface. So you've got interface, show hide, and you're going to hide the main interface. Now I'm not sure why it isn't just hide interface, clear any object you've got, then hide the interface, but let's just keep it as it is because I know it works fine on the game I'm making. Maybe someone can shed some light on exactly how and why that's set up like that. So continuing on, we've set up then an action that will happen when our mouse cursor leaves this little verb coin. So as soon as your mouse pulls away from it, you want this to disappear. Okay, so that's that bit set up. The next part, I suppose the most important part, is to actually add on the other buttons on top of this, set some of these areas as active areas so that they'll change to the active state and they'll collect clicks and things like that. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to set up the default kind of button, which is walk basically. So when you click your left mouse button, you want the character to walk to a particular place. So that default one has to go into this main interface as well, so that you're able to control your character. So I'm just going to put the walk action in there, and there's a few things that we need to set up here. So once we've created that default walk action, we come down to the bottom here and go to command properties. So this is our kind of default command. So whenever we're kind of clicking to walk and move about, we want the cursor that's used just to be the default arrow cursor, and that should go orange and active when it mouses over active things automatically. One thing I tend to do, and again it's optional, items can be dragged with this command, because that's just going to be a left click. I want to be able to eventually, when I set up the inventory, actually drag items out the inventory and drop them onto other items to use them. I think that's quite a nice way of controlling some of these things. So I select that personally. And this command, as in walk, can actually be used on objects and characters. So you can walk to objects and walk to different characters. And it's set up on my particular template as being a combined action and uses the conjunction word with. Now I think that is so that when you're using an item with another item and it's being dragged out of the inventory, so say you're dragging a hammer onto a nail, it'll say hammer with nail, because you're using your left mouse button, which is going to be the standard interface option here. So the other things we need to set up in this particular interface are these three buttons, and the first one of them is going to be the action, which if you like is pick up or use or something like that. So that's going to be our action coin interface, and we're going to set up a look on the coin, whoops, and we're going to set up a talk on the coin. I'm just naming it coin so I can see it in other menus when I select it, so I know which one it is. So the action one, first of all, we'll set that up. The properties for this particular one, so we click on action up there and we look at the properties down here. Again, the cursor that we want to use by default is the arrow cursor, and we want to be able to pick up and use and things like that on objects and characters, and we can do combined actions with this one as well. So on to the look one. The look one should be set as the arrow. I've got a name in here as well, which is look at. That means that in the interface, when you have selected to look, it'll say look at and the name of the object. And we can look at objects and characters as well. Okay, now the talk one, final one. We want it to say talk to when somebody mouses over this. The cursor is going to be the arrow, and we want to be able to talk to objects and characters, and it's going to be a normal command. Okay, now the other things that we need to set up for each of these three, action, look and talk, is a kind of active image, so that when someone mouses over each of these, in my case they're going to light up orange. So let's start with the look one first. I'll go to active image and I'm going to load the asset, the eye asset, and you can see there it is there. Now it's obviously not lined up, I need to line it up on top of there. So I'm going to click on look coin, and you've got a couple of little icons here. One to create object areas, which is the kind of hit area for the mouse. One to create interface areas, which is the actual active area. We did that when mouse leaves it a minute ago, so you actually need to set how big that is. And you can put action text on here, so it actually prints text, use hammer with nail and things like that in that interface. And the final one is to actually place these images. So I'm just going to click that and you'll see a little border appears. when you mouse over, you can actually drag that into position to line it up. I think, yeah, the cursor keys work as well for nudging things around there. So I'm just going to do talk as well, and I'm going to go active image and get the talk one. Do the same with that, move that into position, and we're going to get the action one and get an image file for that and the hand. So again, I was just careful when I made these bits of artwork that they lined up correctly and that you can sit them on top of each other nicely. So the other thing we need to do then is actually set up the active areas of these, because these like bounding rectangles you can see moving about here aren't the hit areas. We need to set them up. So with the action one, we're going to click on create and edit object areas, and you get this little green cursor. It might be a different colour on yours. I think you can change the colours in your options, and I'm just going to kind of roughly go around the outside of that. Remember, if you hold control and use your middle mouse button, you can zoom in, so you can see that a little bit better, and it doesn't need to be completely neat, it's just so that your mouse cursor will become active at that point. Same with the look coin, so I'll just go around the eye. Again, it doesn't need to be exact, it kind of helps just so that users kind of expect as soon as they go into that object for their cursor to become active. And the talk one as well. So there we go, around that. And what I should end up with in the middle of this, I mentioned earlier I want this to appear beneath my cursor, is a non-active area of pixels just in the middle where the cursor will be at the start, and it'll just be a tiny move for a player to get to any of those options. So I've got all them set up. The other important thing to do is this button. Now that isn't related to which one you've got selected here, it's actually an overall one, which is to just mark out the size of the interface where you want your cursor to be active within. I could go right the way around the circle, but it actually helps a little bit, I've found, to have some padding on these circular things, so that while the user's mouse is still here, it's not going to disappear until they've moved right the way out there. So we've got all of those set up. That should be getting close to being able to be used. So the next thing that we need to do then, we need to get this set up so that our character, the knight, uses this particular interface when it comes to them moving about. There's a few other bits and pieces we're going to need to set up here. So going back to the verb coin, if you go to properties, now we've put some commands in here like walk, action, look and talk. We just need to set the standard command to be walk. So as a general rule for the character that uses this interface, you want them just to be walking when you're clicking about. You don't want any special actions triggering at any other point. Okay, so that should be that set up. What we need to do now then is go back to our characters tab, and we need to go to the knight, and on its interface panel we need to actually just tick. You can see that a new interface has appeared there, the verb coin. It says these interfaces are visible by default. To use but hide an interface at the start, you can hide it in the start action. I'll go into that later. I have had some issues with cursors before when I've been testing some of this, so we might have the same thing, and I'll show you how to set that up, how to get around that. What it basically means is when you first start, you're going to see that verb coin on screen, which isn't the kind of thing that we want. So we'll work our way around that when it happens. So one of the things we need to do still in order to be able to play this game, if I try again and run this, it'll still fail. That's because we still haven't set up a start room, we haven't put our character in that room, and we don't have any fonts set up for the character to use if they speak or when you look at items and things like that. So we need to do all of that next. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually set up a starting room, and in order to do that we need to add a few things to one of these rooms. I'm going to do it with this frog door room. It's going to be a little bit more interesting to set up because you've got a pillar in the way. So what we need to do with this particular room in order to use it is we need to set a walkable area in it. So this walkable area is the area that the character can walk in without them kind of floating off up the wall or anything like that. So it's kind of like giving the Visionaire engine a clue as to what is the bit you want the player to be able to get around. The easiest way to do that, you select the room, you go to Way Systems, and you can see there's Way Systems and Action Areas. We'll come into the difference of those later on. Just want you to add a new Way System. You see a little plus appear, and you'll have one called Way System 0. I often rename that to normal. You can have multiple way systems in a room because something might happen in your story which changes the area you can walk in. For example, if this pillar fell over and kind of came all the way down here diagonally, then you wouldn't want the character to be able to walk over that, they'd have to walk around. So you can actually at any point switch to a different way system. So I've just put the normal one in for now, and there's two parts to a way system. There's the actual borders, the areas that someone can walk in, and then there's these waypoints, and these waypoints are helping the engine to direct the character around. It's a bit like AI, so it's the best way to walk in the room so that you don't get the characters doing strange things. So first thing I'm going to do is set up some way borders, and I'm just going to kind of click on the actual image of the areas I want my players to be able to walk into. Now I kind of want them to be able to go not much further than that, just onto these steps, and then they can go all the way along there, and you can see the little tick. So I've now got this green dotted area that they can walk around in. Ignore the pillar for now. We're going to add the walkable bit behind that later on. It'll automatically do it, you'll see when we finally test this out. We just then need to set the pillar base position so that our character actually appears to go behind it. So once you've got the borders in, waypoints are your next task, and if this is the door that the characters come in, then we should put a waypoint right near where they're starting and just dot round a couple of points in the kind of path that you would want the character to walk. So if, say, they clicked over here by the frog, you'd want the engine to kind of take them either this way, round the back toward here, or if I go back to the first point and the arrows go blue, just to reselect that first point, you might want it to send the character this way instead. And what they kind of give clues to the engine about the best way to send the character so that they don't end up getting stuck in a corner or anything. What I often do as well is at some of these points, if I say I'm going to have an object in this bottom left corner, and our character is currently stood over here, he might then go all the way up and round, and then he might come down to here before he goes across. So it's sometimes a good idea just to put in another couple of kind of little sticks from points. So on there, click that one, click here, just to give a good coverage of points to places where you might, I mean, you'll know because you'll be putting objects in the room, which bits are important to be able to walk to. I think at some point I'm going to have them walk over here to this pile of stuff on the floor, so I kind of want to point there, and I maybe actually want to point from there to roughly there as well, so that he doesn't walk back on himself. So that's all the walkable area set up. Only takes a minute, and you can kind of refine this as you go. There are some other tools here for character size, and this is so that you can make the character appear to be going into the distance. If you had some rolling hills, you can make them go tiny in the distance and things like that. And it's relatively easy to set up. I've not got a particularly deep scene here, it doesn't go back very far, but if I say select this point here, which is kind of one of my most foreground points, I can actually probably drag that down a little bit, might be a bit of a better position. So with this point selected, if I go character for preview here and select the knight, move my cursor back onto here, you can see this is the size that the knight's actually going to be in this room. And at the moment I haven't set any scaling, so he's kind of at his 100%. This is what the -1 means. It's not taking any scaling or anything. I would maybe, if he was walking to the other side of the room, you would expect him to look a little bit smaller when he's up there. Only a tiny bit, mind. It's not a very deep room. So you can do that by selecting the closest one here, and drag this to 100%. So it should look exactly the same. -1 is just saying it hasn't got scaling applied, so this is 100%. And when he's up there in the room, you want it to be just a little bit smaller than 100%. So say 95. It's just to play around with, really. This, you can kind of get a feel for it yourself. So as I move my character back, he should look like he's getting a bit smaller. I'll tell you what, I'll make it a bit more obvious. Let's change this to kind of 70. So here he's that big, and as I slide my cursor back, he's much smaller in the distance. Now it looks like it's too much, really. So it is kind of a fine thing that you can set. So he's going between 100 and 90. Incidentally, if he comes this way, he's getting slightly bigger than 100. So sometimes a good idea to put those a bit closer to the edge so it doesn't scale up too much. And it's going to be only really subtle, that, but I think that's going to be enough. Maybe go down a touch more. So he's that big there and that big there, just a tiny bit. It'll help sell the illusion of the size of the room. You can see moving him diagonally across there now. He's a bit bigger in this foreground than he is over there in the background. So it's very cleverly working out the size that he needs to change to. Okay, you can turn that back off again so it doesn't keep on appearing on your cursor. So now we've got a room set up and a character can walk in it. What you really need to do is set up an object or a place that the character can arrive in the room. And we had set up this pillar earlier on, but I actually want my character to appear here as if he's just come through this door. So I'm actually going to create a new object, and again this is a personal naming convention. When it's a door that I'm setting up, I usually put door _ and I usually put where that door goes to. So in this case it's going to be to cave, which is the other room. And then what you're going to do once you've created an object, a bit like when you did the interfaces, you're going to then draw an active area for that object. And these again can be refined later, but I'm just going to do quite a hasty kind of area around that arched door. Okay, that's set up. And the other important thing when you're setting up an object is its actual alignment to the character. So what this means is when I look at an object, or in this case when I go to walk out a door, where does it actually send my character to? Imagine if I was looking at this statue thing that's going to be in the wall, and I was stood here. You'd want the character to walk over and come to a position before he starts looking at it, talking and things like that. So that's what this alignment of character to the object is for. So this is the object, this is the empty door. You click the little set object position, and it brings up the whole room for you, and it shows you, importantly, the walkable area. You want to make sure that this position that I'm going to set by clicking, you can click wherever you like to set it, is inside the walkable area. If you put it outside the walkable area, you'll start to get problems where the character gets stuck and or just doesn't move at all, or he might even walk off up the wall up the rest of the picture. So to make sure it's in the right position, as close to the edge as you can. You can see here as well, you can actually change to different wear systems if your room has different wear systems in it. That should be fine for now. So we've now set it up so that the character will move to that position, and we also can set up the alignment so when the character does walk towards that door, he is facing left. Or you could even go diagonally up left if your characters have those positions. This particular character doesn't, so just the left position. Okay, so that's got an area set up called door to cave. If you want, you can give that a name, so when the cursor goes over it, it would say door to cave. Again, just a stylistic choice. I tend not to on doors. I just kind of leave them blank. The cursor will I'm going to set up an action shortly to change the cursor to the door cursor. Well, let's do that now, I suppose, while we're there. So on the action for that door, when a cursor goes over it, we want to execute a command on that object. We want that to happen here where the cursor enters the object area. And the thing that we want to happen when the cursor enters this object area, we put in here, and we want to change the cursor, which I think is under interface. Is it? Yep, set cursor. And we're going to set that cursor to be the door cursor. And then when our player moves their cursor away from this object, we want to make sure that we create an entry for that as well. So cursor leaves that object area, we want to set the cursor again, so interface set cursor back to the standard arrow cursor. Okay, so that should now function correctly when you mouse over and mouse away from that. So we can now actually tell the engine that this is the room we want to start in, and we can tell the character to be in this room when the game starts, and we can tell the character to be at that position. So we'll do all of that now. So we'll go to the character first of all, and it's the knight character. I'll just move him to the top, he is the most important. So the knight character, we go to the properties of that character, and here we tell the engine where the character stands at the start of the game. And we click this little link, and it'll bring up all the different scenes we've got. And if you remember, it was the frog door scene, and it's that item. You can see all the items appear for that. That door to cave item that we want to stand at. So that should have the character positioned in the correct direction when the game starts. The other thing that we need to set up is actually in the game options, and that is what the first scene is of the game. So the first scene we want to start in is this frog door scene. We also need to set up the active character here across to the side, which is the knight. We should actually be in a position now that we've got our cursors and we've specified our first scene and our active character, and we've got a position. Remember, we just put the knight there in a position in that room to actually run our game for the first time. So fingers crossed. When we hit, just on the other recap things as well, the other real important thing is that we've gone knight interfaces and enabled that interface. Because that interface contains the basic walk action, the basic mouse action, without that hookup you will still get that error at the start of the game. It needs to be set as the character's interface. So fingers crossed. We'll do Control and S to save, and we're going to hit F9, and hopefully we will see the character in the room at that point. And we have. Now he's facing the wrong direction. Oh no, he's not actually. He's facing the direction that we set, and that's kind of quite important actually. I've made a mistake there. I'll just quickly change that and explain why. I've set the door as if someone's walking to the door, but he's actually coming in through that door, so let's quickly change that. So we'll go back to the frog door, door to cave. If you remember was the item, you can turn this on if you're unsure of which item it is you've got selected. And he's currently facing left because he's been told to arrive at this. We're actually going to make him face right instead. Control and S to save, F9, and there you go, he's facing the right direction. You can see your cursor now, which is good. You can also see the interface in the top left corner there. This is what I mentioned earlier on, that it's going to show that by default. If I mouse over it now, you should see some of those things light up, and as soon as my mouse comes back outside of there, it'll disappear and we won't be able to get it back. Now that's fine for now, we're going to set that up properly later. So if I just mouse over here, you should see the active area there is making my cursor go orange on each of those active areas, and when I move my cursor outside of the interface, the action that we set up runs to hide it. We've got to sort that out yet, but ultimately it's kind of half built, that interface. The other interface, the standard walk one that's involving this cursor, should be working in this room because this character now is stood at that position, and if I click anywhere else within the walkable area or even outside the walkable area, he will use those navigation points to get around. You can see from earlier as well, all of our hard work's paying off. His little standing animation is that little breathing animation that's going on. It just adds a little bit of life to it. Quite exciting seeing it in the room, even though it's the basic room, the sketch at the moment. And you can see as well the other cursor that's working. See the out the door cursor? So as we go into that active area and out of it, that little action we set up to change the cursors is working as well. So here we go, the moment of truth. Hopefully when we click, the character will move to that location and the walk cycle will trigger for that direction as well. And off he goes. And we click back and he turns round, and we click to the top of the screen and up he goes, and to the bottom of the screen. You can see all those different walk cycles are being triggered. If I click over here, like away from the walkable area, he'll walk as far as he can in that direction, and same as back and to the edge of the walkable area. Now at the moment you can see he's actually walking over the graphics, as we need to actually set some floor levels for these foreground areas so we can walk behind them, and it looks like he's walking in front of the pillar, but if I walk around the back way, the pillar's completely flat. We haven't set in the foreground and the height of the pillar and things like that yet. So we can set all that up first, so that this room is kind of more realistic. We'll go and do that. So we're going to go back to the frog door room, and on graphics pillar, if you remember from a couple of tutorials ago, this place images and animation, we've got this as a separate asset here. That's the important part. And that particular asset, what we need to do with it is we need to set up a couple of things. If we want the character to be able to look at it, and it might be an idea here just for a bit of extra interactivity, we need to create an object area. So I can just quickly, again, because this is just a sketch in the background, we're going to be changing all these graphics anyway, so I'm just going to quickly whiz around that to set an active area for it. And the other thing we're going to do is we're going to set a position for it. This is a good example actually. So when we click to look at this pillar, for example, I want the character to kind of walk to, say, this position, say here, and I want it to face the pillar to look at it. So I want it to face that way. So we've set up a particular position for that. Now the important bit, if you remember back here on the character page, when we set up the character's walking and standing positions, you remember this registration point, I think they call it animation center. Now the height of that is the important bit here. When we're in a room, this pillar we're going to deal with, we need to actually set the object center of that pillar as well, using a very similar tool here, set object center. And so if we click that, it brings us up the whole map, the whole screen again. We then click and we can drag to actually set the kind of base floor level of this. And what the engine does is it compares the character's base floor to this object's base floor. So as the character walks above here, it'll put it behind here. If it's below here, the character will appear to walk in front of it. So that's all you need to do, is drag this to the right position. It does get more complicated when you've got lots of things in the rooms at different heights, but this should be fairly straightforward. So with that done, the pillar, the other things, because we've now set up an area on this, it might be nice to give that a name. So let's just call that pillar. And this, once we've got the interface sorted out, will start to show up when you mouse over it. It'll say pillar. So save it and hit F9 to run it. You can see our interface has appeared again. It disappears when you go past it. So if I walk past the front of this, I should be in front of it, and if I walk behind it, I'm now behind it. So there you go, you can see that kind of 3D effect. This is now a pillar that exists, looks like in 3D. You do get that clipping across the front of it. The best way to deal with that is to change your walkable area, which I can show you an example of how to do that. We'll do that now. We'll alter that. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually take out that section of the walkable area so that you can't walk there. So if I go to where borders again, I should be able to create another section. If you're cutting a hole in something, I think you have to click outside and actually create the hole around here with a decent safe area so that your character doesn't get too close to it. Like that. Link that up and then drag that point back inside the area. So we've got kind of a hole punched out of our walkable area. It might be worthwhile as well just moving these up a touch so that we've got a little bit higher along there. So let's save that, press F9 and give it another whirl. So when he walks behind, he's still going behind, but if I click here diagonally across, he won't walk across because we've now said that he can't walk on that area. So he'll actually walk around and come to there, and same if I go that way, he'll walk around and go to there, come down, and avoid the edges. Yep. So these are just single clicks around and you can see he's going around that pillar now. Sometimes, like then, when he was down the bottom, and I clicked over here, you would expect him to walk this way, and he's actually walking all the way around there, and that's to do with the actual waypoints again. So I could set a waypoint knowing that if I look at this item he's going to come and stand here the quickest way. He's obviously not travelling the quickest way, so what you can do, because I've got in a bit of a mess with all these waypoints now, I've gone round as I've been demonstrating things, just click on waypoints and click on one of the waypoints so that it highlights, and then if you press your delete key on the keyboard you can kind of keep tapping delete and it'll delete every waypoint. Now that we've got that hole in the middle, the way border, I think it's causing some issues, so I'm going to redraw the waypoints. I'm doing much simpler as well, so I'm just going to start as if he's at the door. I'm going to put a few more in, so there's a few more on the paths to go around all the way to the steps, and then around all the way back the other way, something like that. And I think I'll put one extra one which goes from there to there, because I know I'm going to be doing that later. Let's save that, give that a shot instead. So we're moving down to here, and then if I click up here, that's better. Yeah, he moves in that position instead. He seemed to go a little bit high there. It's just because my walkable area is a bit too high in this room, I think. You can see his scaling's gone as well, because we had him scaled from top to bottom, so we'll quickly add the scaling back in. So let's choose the furthest away one. I want to set him to, I think we ended up with about 90, something like that, maybe 85 was it? And for this one that's closest to the camera, to bring it a bit closer, we're going to set him to 100% for that. There we go. So we can always test that out, remember, with the night, from there to there, the scaling idea. Let's give that a save, just take that back off again, and give that another go. Yes, that's nicer. Excellent. So one of the things we need to set up here, you can see the cursor is automatically changing here. A while back I was about to put a cursor action automatically, a cursor on this to change it, but it does it automatically when it's a shape, an object area. One thing we want to fix now is this interface, so we can actually use it to look at things. But prior to that, it would be nice if the name pillar actually came up here. The only reason it's not is because we haven't set a font yet for the actual objects to use. So we'll set up a font next. Okay. What I recommend you do is have a look on some of the free font websites, have a look at some other people's games, have a look at some of the games you've played before in the past, and find a font that you think suits the style of your particular game. Setting up the font's really easy. You just need to go and download a true type font, or you can even download fonts like graphics fonts instead, but I think the true type ones, it was added in version 4, I think. It's a much better way of displaying it. Everything looks much cleaner like that. So you go to the font section, and you can go to font here and press the button so it displays them when we're ready. We're going to go on to properties. This is going to be a true type font, and we're going to select a font from the we're going to select a font from our computer and set up the colour and the border size and things like that. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new font, and this is going to be the font for the knight. So this is going to be the text that he uses to speak, things like that. We're also going to have font for objects, and there will eventually be a font for the frog as well. We might also end up with dialogue selection fonts and things, but we'll work those out later. So these are the three main ones I'm going to set up. First then, the actual knight's voice, if you like. The font I'm going to use is going to be a true type font, and I'm going to go and select that. I've already moved that into assets, user interface and fonts. It's called Barrio Regular. You get a kind of preview in Windows there of what it's like. It's kind of like a hand-drawn, thick, thin thing. Kind of suits the style of this game, I think. Certainly when I come to do all the rest of the artwork, it's going to be very much like that. So I click open on that and it selects it. You can change the size of it. At the moment there's no preview on this page, you actually got to go back a page to preview it. So if I go back to font, you'll see it's there. You can see the letters, but it's all squashed up. So I'll show you how to change that. So I've set 22 as the point size. It's currently white with a black border. And it's got a drop shadow on it. To change the spacing, you want to change this letter spacing here. If I just put that to say 2 or 3 for now, go back to font, you can see it's spaced the letters out. You can set this really wide if you want, if you wanted it to be really spaced out, but for this particular font 3 seems to be nicely spaced. They're kind of just touching in places. It looks quite nice. So the actual colour of this, I kind of want it to be in this same kind of Visionaire orange, I think. So let's dial up an orange, nice bright yellowy orange, something like that. Check it again. Yeah, it's a little bit dark orange of that. Let's go towards the yellow. Okay. And the border and the shadow again. You can offset this shadow. When you can see that dark shadow underneath, but it was quite nice as it was. Really, it just gives it a bit of definition if it's on a light background. And you can change the thickness of the border. Left click makes it bigger. Right click makes it smaller. See, thick border around it. But that was fine as it was, I think. Yeah, it was good. All of those settings. Entirely up to you how you do it. I could have actually, in fact I'll do that as an example. And I've got the font knight one set up, rather than going through and setting all the others up the same and just changing the colours. Just delete those two. And we'll just take the knight one, and as with most things in Visionaire that are in a list, you can copy and paste. So we're going to copy and paste that, and it's going to be font frog. And the frog's font naturally is going to be green. And that's going to look like that, and copy and paste that, and that's going to be the font for objects. And I think what I'm going to do, because this is going to be part of the UI, I'm actually going to make it a little bit smaller, that font, and it's going to be plain white. So it's a little bit smaller, that font. I might end up changing that to a different true type font actually, but for the time being it'll be fine, so we can see some things on screen. Okay, so I'm going to give that a save. One thing we need to do now in the game settings, we need to come down and set the object text font here. So what is it? It's a font which is used for text displayed with display object text. So we click there and we choose font for objects. You also need to set this action text, which is the most important one, because these are going to be the things that pop up actually at the cursor, and that's the default action for that. I've changed that in my own game so that the action text doesn't appear at the cursor, it actually appears up at the top of the screen. I just prefer that kind of layout, but I'll show you what the default looks like. So draw action text at cursor, and you choose the font objects font. If I give that a save and hit F9, then hopefully when we mouse over this pillar, it does indeed say pillar. So that's going to follow the cursor around whilst it's within the area of the pillar. and if I click on the pillar you can see that the actual character moves to that position that we set and faces the correct direction for it. So again, click and it goes to it. So anything else that we set up in here, remember this door, if we'd actually put a name for the door, that would also appear when we moused over that, so that could say to cave, for example. So if I went back to the room, frog door, door to cave, and just click that, so this is the one, could say to cave, save that. Now when you mouse over here it says to cave, pillar to cave. Okay. So what we're going to do next as the final part of this tutorial, because I know we've had to chop and change between doing interface stuff and testing that and cursors and everything else, is to get this coin interface working properly. The reason it isn't working at the moment, when we click F9, it comes up at the start, you saw it there, and when it's actually moused over, there's no actions set up for what to do when you click each of these. So we're going to set all of that up, and then we're going to work out a way of hiding this at the start and only showing it when you click and hold your button for a long period of time on an object. So you'd kind of click and hold and it would appear here, and then you can select an object, select a command from that. So we're going to set that up now. So first things first, you're on the interface panel, you've got your verb coin interface, and we're going to set up the actions for each of these particular things. We can ignore walk for now, because walk is the default action effectively. So the action section, which is the hand here, it's to kind of use or pick up. What we need to do is go to actions here. So when somebody clicks this, we want to set up when they left click that item, we're going to do a series of things. Their cursor is going to be over something like the pillar when they left click this particular item here. So what we want to do, that pillar is effectively becomes something called the saved object, the thing that's in memory at the time. So if we go to execute a command on the saved object, what we're basically saying is that we're wanting to, when we click this, to execute this same command, which is action, on the object that you've just done, so that you've just put your mouse on, so use pillar or pick up pillar or something like that. And then the other things that we want to do when somebody clicks this is to hide this interface away again, so it's once it's been clicked it disappears. So we can set the visibility of the interface. You'll remember this from before, when we mouse out of it it's exactly the same set. So interface, set visibility, and again this was set up in the particular template that I used. I'm not quite sure why they don't just hide it, but there's probably a very good reason for it. I'm going to hide then interface, show hide interface, and it's our main interface we want to hide. So just to recap there, when someone left clicks it, they're going to execute the command, whichever command it is, in this case an action, on the object that's under the cursor. We're going to set the visibility of this main interface to 0 so that it goes and disappears straight away, pause for half a second, and then actually hide this main interface. Okay, that's that one set up. And the other things we need to do here is we want to actually, these, remember the areas we set up here around them, we want to set the cursor to highlight this when we actually go in and out of it automatically, because it's an action area the cursor changes. If you remember a little example of that, so the cursor's changing but nothing else is happening, it's not lighting up the active version of it. So we need to set that up correctly. So on the action one here, we want to set up an action for when the cursor enters that button area, and funnily enough there should be one called cursor enters button area. And what we want to do then is we want to set the command for this whole interface, in this case to be the action coin action. That sounds confusing. So the cursor enters the button area, we want to set the command of the interface to be action coin. So when somebody enters here automatically sets the action to be action. I shouldn't have called this action, I should have called this use. I'll tell you what, let's change that to use. This will be much less confusing. So when the cursor enters the button area, set the command to use coin. It's another nice thing about Vision Air, you'll see there it just updated everything. You sometimes have to click away and then come back for it to actually update some of these interfaces, but that is really helpful. So we actually put the interface into the use mode as soon as somebody mouses over that. And we also want to set that cursor back to arrow. So interface set cursor back to arrow. And we also need to set up something when the cursor leaves that button area. So cursor leaves button area, and it's pretty much, we set the command, so that's the mode that it's in. We set the command back to walk because we're finished with this interface now when you leave this, and that should do it for that one. We also need to do the same for look and talk, so we could actually copy these. We can copy all of those actions there, go onto the look coin one and paste them. So when you left click, we can execute the command on the object that's under the cursor and hide all of that. When the cursor enters it, we're going to get this command not as use coin, because we're on the look one now. We'll set it as look coin. And then when it leaves, we set it back to walk. With the talk one, paste them into there as well. We're going to set the command to talk. And when it leaves, you can see it's on walk as well. Okay, let's give that a save. So we can test that out and see which parts of that are working and which aren't. So we hit F9, and we go to our interface. You can see they now light up because we've set the over actions, and you can see that says look at, talk to, and this one, yeah, thought so, it doesn't actually say anything. Remember back to a while ago in this tutorial where we set up some actual names for them. Part of the reason why I didn't put a name on it is because it's two actions in one. It's kind of use and it's pick up. So we could write that as its name, I suppose. We'll do that as an example. So when we go the use thing on button properties, sorry, it's command properties, not button properties. You see this one says look at, that one says talk to. We could call this one use / take, something like that. Let's give that a shot. So now it says use, take, talk to, look at. I mean, in a lot of cases, if your icons are self-explanatory enough, I like to try and keep the interface nice and clear, so I would probably take them all off, to be honest. I'd get rid of all of those, so that when you actually run this, it's fairly obvious that's a speech bubble, an eye, and a hand, and you can kind of work that out. And once a user's kind of used one or two objects in your game, they'll be really used to this particular interface. So now all we need to do is set it up so that when we actually click on something, it doesn't just walk there. If we click and hold on it, it pops up that interface. So that's going to be tricky, but it shouldn't take too long. So what we need to do then, this is actually to do with the overall game setting of what the mouse button does and what happens when you hold the mouse button down. So we need to go to game settings here, and we want to go to mouse properties. And it's actually in this bottom section here where it says time until mouse button hold. So this is basically how long it takes the system to determine a hold as opposed to a click. Now, just from experience with my other game, I'm going to set that to 250, which is a quarter of a second, which is really quick, but you don't want it to be too long, so someone has to click and hold their button for ages to actually get this interface to appear. And the next thing that we're going to do is set up an action for when that pressed time elapses. So after a quarter of a second of holding the mouse button down, we're going to run an action here. So we click this to start writing that action. So what we're going to create here is our first if statement. If you're not a programmer, then there's nothing to really worry about here. The if statements are very powerful. Conditional things: if one condition exists, then do this. What we're going to be doing here, the usual way, it's in the condition section. We're going to be checking to see if an object below the cursor exists. So we should have if current object. So if object below cursor exists, then we're going to do a big list of things. First thing I recommend doing when you create an if straight away is use an end if, and then you can actually put all your actions inside between these things. And what we're going to do in this case is we're going to go to interface save object. So we're saying if someone holds their mouse button down on top of an object, then we want the engine to save that particular object into memory so that we can start doing looking at and picking up and things like that to it. We then want to show our main interface. So show hide our main interface. And again, because we've been doing this visibility thing where we've been fading it out and fading it in, we need to do that too, because if the interface is faded out to 0, even if you show it, if its visibility is still 0, then you're not going to be able to see it still. So we need to set the visibility of that interface. So set interface visibility to 100, and just so that we've got an opportunity to check the engine's done everything. I think that's why this template that I had before has got this half-second pause, just to make sure everything's set up correctly and ready to be used. Okay, and that should be it for the actual holding the mouse button down. The other one that we need to set up is the left mouse button hold when it's released, and it's the usual thing that we want to actually hide that interface again. So in this case we're going to set the visibility of the main interface back to 0, and you've guessed it, we're going to pause for half a second, and then we're going to actually hide the main interface again. Oh no, that's all active interfaces, we don't want to do that. We want to go interface, show hide interface, and it's our main interface. Hide. Okay, so there should be the two actions set up. Let's give that a go. Save, F9. So if I click and hold on this pillar now, oh, there we go. Let go, it disappears again. If I click and hold, and I let go, it disappears. So what we need to do is we need to position the interface to be under our cursor, because what's happening is it's detecting me being outside of this interface, so it's hiding it straight away again as soon as I move the mouse. So what we need to do then is we need to change that offset. So in interfaces we go verb coin, and in the properties here we want to offset that. So we're going to, I think my actual graphic's about maybe 150 across, something like that. Let's just do 80 and 80 as a rough guess. So with that offset, let's see if that helps. So click to go to the pillar, and click and hold, then yes, you can do that. I think there is another problem here though, because if I move outside of here, the interface disappears, and when I click and hold again I don't see the interface again. I think this is actually, you can see, yeah, it's picking up the areas. This is to do with the visibility, so the visibility is still set to 0, but it's being shown, so the graphics engine is thinking it's there, but it's actually visibility set to 0, so we need to fix that as well. So we've got an error somewhere in the visibility bit of code. If we go to game and mouse properties, it's when we're actually holding the button pressed down, it's not showing it, so there must be an error in this code somewhere. And there it is, I've forgotten to set the visibility of, I haven't selected anything, so it's actually the main interface that we're setting back to 100. That's why we're not seeing it. So save that. Let's give that another go. So walk to the pillar and click and hold. If I move away from it, that's fine. If I click and hold again, yeah, it pops back up. It's much better. If I click and hold, you can see how quickly it appears. So I'm clicking and it appears. Click and let go. So as long as your mouse is held down, you can quickly go between these items. It's just a tiny movement for the player, so you're not having to move around a lot to get these things. If I click somewhere else and hold, you'll notice that it doesn't appear, and that's because it isn't an active object underneath. Remember, we wrote that if statement. If there is an object underneath the cursor, then pop up the verb coin. That'll probably work with the door as well, I would have thought. Yep. So anything that's got an active area underneath it. You could write another if statement to check to see if the name began with door, and then ignore this, but that's a little bit advanced, I suppose, for these tutorials. So we've got an interface coming together quite nicely. We can see objects in the room, we can see these, and we can mouse over them. It's just going to be a matter now of hooking something up to these, so let's just quickly do that as the end of this tutorial. I'm going to hook it up so that we can look at and get a response, we can use or pick up, and we can talk to and get 3 different responses for them. So let's quickly do that. So we need to go to the room, and we need to go to the frog door room, and it's our graphics pillar, and we're going to set up some actions for it. So the first action we're going to do, when a command is executed on this object, and the command that we want to do, you can see all our commands have pulled through now from our interface because it's set up correctly. So when somebody uses it, and it's a dual purpose one, use and pick up. You don't need to set an item. This is just if somebody clicks the use action on there, then in this box you set what you want to happen. Now in this case we're not going to have anything happen. I'm actually going to make the character say something. So in this case we're going to display some text as if the character's speaking. The default in Visionaire is to display text by the current character, so you don't have to set that up every single time. And then we type in here what we want the character to say. So we're using a pillar. He might say something like, what would I use a pillar for? ? And that's that one set up. So for the next one, I sometimes just copy and paste that action and then change the use to look, and then you've already got a display text written there. So when he looks at it, it's a sturdy pillar. If you want to put a second line of text, you can just copy and paste this. It's a sturdy pillar. Thankfully it's holding up the roof! ! So it'll say this line first, then it'll say this line. It'll work its way down this list, however big this list is. I like to kind of put a couple of dots in, and it'll show those in 2 separate parts. As you go on and this becomes more complex, you don't actually need to put 2 totally separate display text items. You can put a lot of text in here and use some little formatting tags to break up the lines, but this is fine for now. So if I save that, we've just done look and use. Let's do a talk to as well, so copy that, talk coin, just delete one of them, and this talk coin, I don't think a pillar will talk back. It's one of the great things about making adventure games as well. You get to kind of put the words in the mouth of the characters and things, and I end up spending a lot of time refining these things, trying to make them funny if at all possible, and a lot of it harks back to that brilliant script writing, Tim Schafer and Ron Gilbert, on things like Monkey Island and Day of the Tentacle, and that kind of humour that you get in these games is kind of what turned me on to these games in the first place. So, with all those bits done, you should now see that the pillar has actions for a use coin, a look coin, and a talk coin. So they should all be set up now to do different things. If I click save and run it again, we've still got our interface showing at the start. We'll hide that in a minute as well. If I click and hold on here and go look, the character should walk to it and then start talking, and you can see it's actually triggering his talking animation. Now at the moment we can't see the character's text, and that might be for one of a couple of reasons. Most probably I've not set the font up correctly, or I've not set a place for that text to appear when the character speaks. So let's have a look at that. So it's most likely to do with the character, so we'll go to the character tab, we go to the knight because that's the character we're dealing with, and we'll go to the properties of that knight. And sure enough, over here we haven't selected a font for the knight to talk in, and we haven't selected Dialog Fonts either. Now we're not doing dialogue yet. Dialogue in Visionaire is when you're actually speaking to another character, but for the time being just let's set all of these to font knight, so it's going to use that orange text, and we can set that to the arrow cursor. Comment sets, they're actually really useful. That's the kind of stock dialogue that a character will say all the time if you haven't put some dialogue in. So for example on the talk one, if someone's constantly talking to an object that don't talk back, you can set up comment sets here, standard comment sets that it will use, but I'll go into that later on. So we've added the font. If I click save again and run it again, let's try looking at that pillar again. So look at pillar, it's a sturdy pillar, there we go. Thankfully it's holding up the roof. So you get your 2 lines of dialogue. They're timed actually for the amount of characters that are in the sentence, so the Visionaire engine automatically times how long they're on screen. What I've found is what can happen sometimes, you can click to skip when you've finished reading. And one of the issues I had when I was making my other game, Something Foul Afoot, I found myself, when it was being tested, people reading that, clicking and accidentally skipping the second one. So what was happening is this first one was timing out, they were clicking just as it timed out and skipping the second one and missing the text. So a way around that, it does mean a bit of extra work in all of the dialogue that you write, but I haven't from the forums been able to glean a better way of doing this really. You go to the game settings, you put the tick box in always allowing to skip the current active text, so that they can always skip it even in cutscenes and things. And what you do in the actual text blocks, so if I go back to the pillar, actions, use coin, in any text box you can put a little tag. It's a HTML tag for paragraph at the end of every line. Now this won't show up the P, but what it'll actually do is when the engine gets to there, it will effectively pause, and it'll stay there until somebody clicks. It's the same for these ones as well. You can do P. The other advantage to this as well is you can actually get rid of these secondary ones. So if I copy all that text out of there and get rid of this, it can all sit in one thing now, because that P actually separates the two up. Put another P on the end. And this is just a habit I got used to get round that issue of people accidentally skipping text and missing a bit of the story, because if you imagine you've got a puzzle where it's really important somebody knows a little bit of information and they've accidentally skipped it, it can totally ruin the whole game. So I'm going to save that. You'll see it doesn't look any different. So I'll look at that. It's a sturdy pillar, and you'll notice it stays on screen forever. That Now the character continues moving his head as if he's talking all the time, which is fine. If I click, it'll then move on to the next one, and again that'll stay on the screen forever, and then you click again and it stops talking. Entirely up to you whether you use that method. That's the method I've started to use for my other game. Sometimes you can maybe take the last one off on that 2-sentence response there, and we'll run that again. So we'll look at that. It's a sturdy pillar, and it stays there, so you can't accidentally skip the next one. You click once to go to the next one. Oh, and it skipped both of them. That wasn't what I expected at all. Let's put that back in. So look at, it's a sturdy pillar, click. Thankfully it's holding up the room, click. I recommend doing it that way. Unless anyone has any better ideas, feel free to stick comments on here. I would be interested if anyone else has got a better way around that. One of the other things I was going to fix on here, actually, this foreground, he should be going behind that. Eventually, when I've got this room complete, you'll be able to walk down here, and this vase that will be in the foreground in the shadows, he'll go behind that as well. And that's just a matter, again, of having this as a separate asset, like we have with the pillar, so that we can set the base of the foreground stuff. So I'll quickly do that. It's a fairly quick fix. And we go to the graphics foreground, and if you remember, it's on properties and it's object center. So if we set the object center of this to be right down here, then when the character is higher than that, he'll be behind it. So that should have that sorted now. If I run that again and you walk down here, yep, we've got these items. There's going to be some things in the foreground here that will be in front of him. So I think that's enough for this tutorial. It's been a very long one because there's been kind of 4 or 5 dependencies that you need to get these interfaces working, especially something like a coin interface, which is a little bit more complicated. But hopefully you agree it's coming together quite nicely. Character's starting to feel a bit alive, he's talking and things like that. He's got some nice motion and movement. I think it's probably time to take a break from doing some Visionaire stuff and maybe get some more artwork done. It's good to chop and change so you don't get too bored of one thing. So I hope it's been really useful for everybody. Stick any comments in there if you've got them. Certainly I'd be interested in some of those little problems that I always have, if anyone's got any ideas to solve them. And we'll be back next time to work on the next step, which I'm not sure what it'll be yet, but I'll have a think about that between. Okay, thanks for your time. Hope you enjoyed it.